By the time dawn arrived the next morning, I had climbed down from my temporary shelter in the low boughs of a red cedar and tried to work out all the painful kinks from my stiff shoulders and neck. The night had not been kind to me, but I was alive, which is more than my fear-stressed mind expected after yesterday. The night had been harrowing. There was no better word to describe it. The rain hissed among the trees and stung exposed skin angrily, driven by the banshee wail of the wind rushing through the forest, and was accentuated by the chaotic flashing of lightning and heart-stopping crack of thunder. Because of this relentless chaos, it's difficult to say with any certainty, but throughout the night, I thought I heard something large trying to move stealthily in the forest near my shelter. I say trying, because it felt like whatever stalked through the underbrush was more at home in the unnatural Stygian gloom of a cave than under the watchful eyes of nature. Of course, it could just as easily have been my imagination. When the first dim light of dawn started to illuminate the sodden and dripping forest, I spent the better part of 20 minutes straining my eyes with every ounce of concentration as I scanned the grey woodlands around me. I was only 10 feet or so above the ground, but there was no way I was going to step foot from my hide until I was absolutely certain I was alone. Once I was satisfied that I was alone for the moment, I climbed down to the muddy ground. I tried the radio several times throughout the night and into the morning, but I wasn't able to get even a burst of static that might indicate someone was trying to respond. A combination of the storm and interference from the trees worked against me. My first thought was to get back to my Jeep as quickly as possible and run every drop of gas out of its tank, trying to get as far away from this place as I could. When I checked the GPS to see how close I was to its marked position, however, I found the unit unresponsive, and with a disastrous crack across the screen that seemed to mock my dismay, probably caused by my less than graceful scramble from that damned cave. No rifle, no radio, no GPS. Perfect. I still had a compass and the rising sun to guide me though, and that was something. I was only a couple of miles from my tower, which should have been somewhere due south of where I stood. I knew that once I got close, I should be able to either find the service road or the tower itself, so there wasn't much danger of getting myself lost at least. There was a small comfort, but one I gladly took. I moved through the trees and undergrowth with more speed and recklessness than I probably should have. An ankle broken by an errant misstep would have been bad news. Still, even though I hadn't heard or seen anything of my late-night visitor, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. You know that creeping sense of dread you feel when you've just turned the lights off in a basement and now have to climb the stairs back to the light of the doorway, or when you're making your way from your car in a darkened and lonely parking lot. It's the feeling that something is there. Something much more suited to the dark than you are. It's the same feeling that pushed my footsteps almost to a jog as I traversed the uneven ground and storm-felled detritus that tried to hinder my passage. For the next hour, I moved at this pace, aware with every rasping lung full of breath that I should pause and rest for a few minutes, knowing that pushing myself to fatigue would only increase my chances of falling or hurting myself. I imagined myself lying in blinding pain next to an unseen chuck hole, clutching at a broken leg and watching as the sunlight began to dim with the onset of dusk, waiting for whatever haunted my trail to find me. What would happen then? Would I even have time to look on its visage before it struck? Did those campers in the cave? A misstep and stumble that nearly made this nightmare a self-fulfilled prophecy jarred me back to the present. Against all instinct, I forced my pace to slow, first to a trot, then to a walk. Then, reluctantly, I stopped completely, trying to catch my breath while I scanned the dense woodland around me. Nothing. No, not nothing. As my heart began to slow and my breathing returned to a more manageable cadence, I turned my gaze back in the direction I had been headed, and an unconscious smile found its way onto my lips. The sun had risen high in the morning sky during my flight, and now I caught the flash of its reflection on the windows of my tower, not 200 yards directly ahead of me. I laughed aloud with relief, fully aware that the fear-tinted eruption was closer to the manic cackle of lunacy than anything else. I didn't care though, and my feet started forward again on their own, quickly reaching a brisk pace. A few minutes later, I burst out of the trees into the maintained clearing surrounding my tower, feeling the full sunlight on my face for the first time since yesterday morning. Had it only been a day? It seemed like longer. I was so filled with relief that I didn't even register the fact that a forestry department jeep sat parked near my fence-enclosed tower until I started entering the combination into the gate lock. The faded white 12 emblazoned on the corner of the windshield told me that it was Billy's jeep, which wasn't much of a surprise, I realized after a moment. After not hearing back from me, I was more surprised I hadn't returned to find an entire S&R team making preparations to search for their lost puppy. I punched the 4-digit code into the mechanical combination lock on the gate and stepped through, making sure to close and lock it behind me. I stood there a moment, staring through the tall chain-link fence at the dense tree line, wondering if something waited just out of sight in the shadows, staring back at me with hungry anticipation. I shook myself of the sudden chill as best as I could, and made my way quickly to the staircase, taking them 2 steps at a time. Billy was going to be pissed at me, I was sure, but the thought was a fleeting one that didn't take purchase. His displeasure was the least of my concerns right now. When I reached the top, I threw open the trap door and suddenly found myself looking down the muzzle of a very large rifle. Even in that brief moment of abrupt shock, I couldn't register how the barrel trembled in the hands of its agitated master. And I wonder how close I came to having my life ended in a bright flash of light. The moment only lasted a second or two, and then Billy hastily swung the rifle away in a safe direction. "Damn it, John!" he exclaimed, his tone an incongruous mixture of relief and fear. "I almost shot you." I stepped fully through the trap door and let it drop closed behind me. "Jesus, Billy," I breathed, leaning back against the railing. I suddenly felt weary and realized it was most likely the adrenaline now rushing from my system that had kept me moving at such a hurried pace throughout the morning. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, stepping back inside my shack and taking a chair at the small table in the center of the room. I noted with mild interest that he kept the rifle leaning against the table beside him, instead of stowing it in the rack over the door, but decided not to comment on it. Billy Johnson was in his middle years, maybe 45 or so, with a bit of a gut and greyish-brown hair trimmed close. He wore an impressive mustache that reminded me of something of an Old West gunslinger might groom. He was dressed in typical attire, khaki forestry service shirt and brown cargo pants. In addition to the rifle I'd had the unfortunate opportunity to closely examine a moment earlier, I noticed that he wore his .500 Magnum in a holster at his side. That wasn't too unusual when out in the bush. Bears and mountain lions can sneak up on you unawares. Having a hand cannon within easy reach goes a long way towards taking the fight out of them if necessary. It was a little unusual for a drive over to another tower I supposed, but not exceptionally so, given the circumstances. I took the opposite chair, dropping my pack to the floor next to me. I realized my legs were still shaking anxiously, and I placed my hands on my knees to try and calm them. He was trying to deflect, but he was horrendously bad at it. He knew something. I was sure of it. "You know where I've been," I replied, gambling on instinct. I watched his face closely for a reaction, and wasn't disappointed when he winced and turned his focus out of the window and over the forest to the north. "I told you to abort and head back to your tower," he stated brusquely. "But you just had to feed that curiosity of yours, didn't you? You're damned lucky to be alive. You know that." From my chair, I reached under the cupboard to my right and pulled a half-empty bottle of Jameson and a couple of mostly clean glasses. Billy turned his head and raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Alcohol was a no-no up here. When I poured and handed him one of the glasses, however, he accepted it without a word. I took a pull from the other. "It's my own damn fault, I suppose," he continued, turning back fully to me. "It's been so long since anyone's even thought of Camp Leclerc that it didn't even click for me when you told me where you saw the campfire." I took another drink, and then poured a bit more of the whiskey. "Camp Leclerc? You mean that old mining camp?" I asked. "Logging camp, actually," he corrected me. "The mine was there long before the East Atlantic Logging Company set up out there. Nobody knows who dug it. Hell, nobody even knows when it was dug. A long time before the 19th century, at least. Camp Leclerc was established in 1872, and the mine was old, even before that." He looked at me in earnest for the first time since I'd returned and frowned. "You look like hell, John. Got caught in the storm, I'm guessing. Hell of a storm." I only raised my eyebrows, as if to say what an understatement that was. Billy nodded, knowingly, and took another swallow. "Did you find the campers at least?" I shook my head, and turned to look out of the window to the north, where I could almost envision the black void of that mine entrance staring back at me. No, I tracked them to the mine, but lost them in the cave. I jumped when Billy's glass hit the floor, and was out of my chair before I even realized it. Billy hadn't moved from his seat, but now both hands were splayed on the table before him, as if to steady himself. His pale blue eyes were wide and fixed on me. "You went into the cave?" he said, a sudden and horrifying realization dawning on him. It was then I realized my mistake. He hadn't known. He thought I had just discovered the camp and the mine, and then got caught in the storm overnight. A close call, but nothing that couldn't be undone. "Yeah," I replied, nodding slowly and deliberately. "Yeah, I went into that cave looking for the campers. The gate had been cracked open already. Not sure when or by who." I leaned forward in my chair and stared at him, hard. "Billy, there's something in there. I think it got those campers, and I think it followed me out." Billy Johnson's face had gone white then, and I thought for a moment that he might pass out. He scooped his glass up from the floor with numb fingers and poured himself another splash of whiskey, downing it in a gulp. When he spoke again, it seemed far away, distant. "Kuwatami. That's what the Chickasaw called it. And they were here long before we ever were. Angler is what the white man called it, among other names." "Kuwatami?" He nodded. "False brother. Lying man. Or something like that. Hell, I don't know. What do I look like? A translator. It means bad, no matter what language you speak. It means something is out there that isn't supposed to be. Something that was locked away a long time ago and forgotten. It was then that he stood and grabbed his rifle, as if suddenly remembering something. I need to get back to my tower and make a call. Now. I gestured to the radio base station sitting patiently on the table near the door. Why not just use mine? Billy shook his head. Sorry, John, but it doesn't work that way. Special phone, special number. I hope I'm not too late. I started to stand. I'll go with you, I said. He pointed a stern finger at me and narrowed his eyes. No, you stay here. Strap on your handgun and make sure it's loaded. His voice was calm, almost cold, and didn't leave much room for debate. Still, I had no desire to stay here alone with whatever this angler thing was roaming around out there. Billy, I can go with you. I can help. I started to argue, but was quickly cut off when he took a menacing step towards me. And I realized quickly how much I'd underestimated him because of his normally easy manner. You will stay in your goddamn tower, and you will follow your orders, he roared, and I unconsciously took a step back and reclaimed my seat, only managing a shaken nod in acknowledgement. He took a trembling breath, pointed at the radio, and said in a slightly less terrifying tone, And keep that thing on. As soon as I'm back at my tower, I'll radio you with updates. A moment later, he was gone, and the trapdoor slammed shut behind him. I stood and retrieved the Pelican case from under my cot. Inside was the same model of .500 Magnum revolver that Billy had been wearing, heavy and cold in my hands. I loaded it and belted it on the leather holster, feeling the reassuring weight tugging at my waist. John, I heard Billy call from below, and went outside to the walkway, leaning over the railing. He was standing beside his jeep 50 feet below, shielding his eyes from the bright sunlight as he looked up at me. Make sure to keep everything locked. I'll come back for you, he shouted. I raised a hand to him and slid the latch shut on the trap door with my toe. I turned back into my shack as I heard Billy's jeep fire up, and a moment later drive off down through the rough service road towards his tower. I glanced back to the north, to the place where I had first seen the campfire smoke rising the day before me, and suppressed a shudder. I was alone again, safe in my tower and armed, but alone. Abruptly, like an unexpected wave of nausea, the feeling that I was being watched washed over me with a chill, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked back over my shoulder to where Billy had been only a minute before, but saw only the rough surface road and dense impenetrable tree line beyond that. Probably just my imagination, but the feeling didn't diminish, and with every passing breath, I was more and more certain that there was something nearby, just out of sight, standing stone still in the grey-green foliage, waiting. Hello, sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.